Hey everyone, I'm excited to share some game analysis I did recently with FIDE Master Nate Solon, who, by the way, has an excellent YouTube channel of his own and deserves way more subscribers than he has, so definitely go and check him out. You can tell him I sent you. In our session, we looked at two of my recent over-the-board games, which were both draws, but got there in very different ways. He also introduced something new to shape the way you analyze games, making a mistake list, which is actually very similar to my Why I'm Losing document, just a little bit more in depth, and it's designed to help you see the patterns in the kinds of mistakes you're making across multiple games. You're going to see the second game we analyzed. If you want to see the full coaching session, I actually streamed it live on Twitch, and you can now watch it over on my VOD channel. I will link that as always in the description alongside my Twitch if you ever want to catch me live. Hope you enjoy.
Okay, well let's move on to the next game because I think we covered the key moments in this one, and then
Sure.
this other one. So it had in common that at one point you were winning, but you ended up having to settle for the draw, but actually in a very, very different way.
Yeah, that's like the only thing it had in common.
So you go for the French, your opponent goes for the Tarish. Didn't play the opening the most accurately. Now, usually they play knight e2 so as to defend this way with both knights. If they play this, usually their intention is just to sacrifice a pawn like this. And white has some sort of interesting compensation here.
Yeah, I had a game that went similar to this in Vegas. I think it was that game where my king was just like running all over the place.
Yeah.
So yeah, it definitely works. But
Um,
yeah, something you have to know.
your opponent played, I think queen b3 is just not a very accurate move because you played c4, which is a very good reaction. And this is like actually kind of a familiar pattern from the London, actually, where you get to play a takes b and your rook comes into the game and you have this pawn break idea.
Yeah, I really like these positions.
So you did this. You took, which I think was also a good decision to keep the queen side open. I like the decision to open it up, and you have this c4 square you can use. Queen knight a5. I noticed in your own notes to the game, you said you rejected knight b6 because of knight c4, c5.
Um, yeah. I think I just didn't want him to get the knight to c5 because it just seemed annoying.
Yeah, I think if we look a bit further, this is not a problem because imagine knight b6, knight c5, knight c4, and then we're ready with b6 at any moment.
Oh, so maybe it's not so bad. I was thinking I would have to at some point sacrifice my, or not sacrifice, but give up my dark sword bishop to get rid of it. But yeah, I guess I just have that extra pawn and it's
Yeah, it's that
totally
those
fine.
double pawns are sort of coming in handy at the moment.
Yeah.
So this would also be fine. This is why like outposts are so important, by the way, in terms of what makes an outpost is it's not that it is not attacked by a pawn, it's that it cannot ever be attacked by a pawn, right?
Yeah.
So
Which I guess I was just considering that that was an outpost, not thinking that oh, it technically actually isn't because I do have that extra b pawn. So yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense why when I talked with him afterwards, he seemed confused why I made that knight trade and was like, well, I didn't want your knight to get in. And he was like, I think it would have been fine for you.
yeah, you can just play b6 whenever you want. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, you kept a nice so up through here, this whole phase of the game, you're outplaying your opponent. You've got that knight on c4, you've got the a file. Here, actually, you could consider even king d7.
Okay, I did think about
Mhm.
this. Yeah.
Because I think one of the themes of this game is endgame strategy. And one of the biggest things that changes going from the middle game to the endgame is the king becomes an active piece. So getting that king a little closer could be a good idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I've had some recent tournament games where my king safety was just like horrendous.
Mhm.
So I think that the castling was more just like a fear reflex because I didn't want my king to be out in the open, even if it looks like it's very locked down now and going towards the end game. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the queens were still on the board, definitely this would be far riskier. With queens off, it's a good move, but it's also a pretty subtle point, and you're still in great shape here. So the bigger pattern in my little mistake sheet, actually in this game, was trading too much. So
Mm.
the first example of this was here. Now, actually, the engine doesn't think this is a mistake at all, but to my eye, just doubling on the A file first seems so natural and appealing And I'm not sure if I want to really trade this pair of bishops. I mean, maybe, but I can probably do that later if I want to.
Yeah, I think I thought about this as well, and I'm blanking on why I rejected it. There was something about wanting to keep that pawn stuck on a2 rather than allowing him to push it forward. But I guess at this point he just can't do that anyway. Yeah, maybe that was just more of a calculation error again, as is tradition. But I do have a tendency because I did feel as if this was going to be winning because I was like I think I can just get that pawn. So I thought again trading pieces is generally good.
Okay, well this is a great example of, because we were talking about trading, right? Where
Yeah.
in the previous game you're up a lot of material, your opponent's attacking you. That's a spot where you want to trade because
Yes.
you reduce their attacking potential, you make it safe, and you get closer to an end game where with that much of a material advantage, you're going to be winning. In this position, materials equal,
Yeah, I guess I don't have the pawn yet, and
yeah.
even a pawn, as we'll see, is not always enough.
And so a big part of your advantage is in fact that your pieces are more active. So if you're trading active pieces for passive pieces, your opponent's getting closer to a tenable position, and you don't have that material advantage to fall back on. If everything is traded off, it's going to be an equal end game. This game, like a lot of themes of like practical end game strategy, came into play. So I know I just searched end game on your channel, and so there you've done a few videos on like theoretical end games, like maybe king and pawn versus king, maybe like Lucena position or something like that.
Yeah.
We distinguish between technical endgames and practical endgames. So technical endgames are the ones where there's just a few pieces left on the board, and it's essentially like a mathematical solution. Like there's just a method to win, and you know it and you implement it.
Yeah.
Practical endgames is when there's more pieces left on the board and there's still play to the position. So there's no solution to this position. It's like a chess position that we have to play, use judgment, all that, right?
Yeah.
So technical endgames is basically just a matter of learning the procedure and practicing it until you can do it. Practical endgames, we have to use principles. So a few of the big ones are activate the king, and another big one is don't hurry, meaning improve your position to the maximum before changing something, such as making an exchange or a pawn break.
Yes. And I have, as we will see in this game, I have had issues with this in the past and continue to. Clearly, I get impatient and I either trade or I rush it.
And yeah, it's a big mindset shift. I think it's a hard one for a lot of people because I think what happens is you sort of start to worry of like, well, if I don't see exactly how I'm going to win, maybe there is no win, so I have to make something happen right now.
Yeah. And it's an interesting shift too from like in like a maybe more tactical middle game where it's like you have to play this move right now or you're not going to have this chance again to win the game or you're going to be losing the game to suddenly we're in this like slower, more maneuvering type of end game where you actually need to be patient and if you do try and rush it and like force tactics, which I think is kind of the idea, it doesn't work.
Yeah, because like in the opening and middle game, often time is of the essence. Like you're trying to do things very quickly before your opponent does them.
Yeah.
Like both sides have a lot of useful moves, a lot of things they want to be doing, and you only have time to do so much of it. Sometimes in the end game, you get to a point where your opponent just doesn't have anything they can do. And that's where you can be like very patient and almost like sadistic of just like improving very slowly. And then once you sort of get the feel for it, you realize that that can be a great way to win because you just improve, improve, improve until your position's overwhelming. Or what also happens is they see the writing on the wall and they freak out and self-destruct. That actually happens a lot because most people are not comfortable. They're just like, oh, do like I'll just my opponent's position is getting better and better. I guess I'll just wait and like see how they're going to beat me. Like people don't really like to play that way. Yeah. Now, having said this, objectively, bishop a3 is not a big mistake because you actually did manage to um, win this pawn. Although one sort of like interesting little wrinkle here is if your opponent just waits, I don't know if you might not want to actually take this pawn on a2
Oh, interesting. Because it
because
just forces all the trades.
yeah, so if you take with the bishop, you're in a pin, which might be hard to get out of. But if you take with all the rooks, this is actually like essentially the end game you ended up in the game.
Yeah.
And with no rooks on the board, you might not be winning here because white's king is going to come to a3, and you probably can't really break through.
I see.
You, yeah.
So maybe taking on c3 back in that other position instead of playing bishop b3, maybe that was better. Because then I get a passer out
Mhm.
of the deal too.
Yeah. So that's a great point. This is actually a better move. So your opponent does get this pawn back, but
Yeah.
a protected pass pawn in the endgame is an amazing asset. And you can actually just go back here. This pawn is extremely weak. You can win that at some point if you want to.
Okay.
But this protected pass pawn right here is so valuable. That should win you the game. Now, don't get back rank mated, obviously, but your opponent is quite tied down, so you have plenty of time to just do g6 or whatever. However, it actually worked. Your opponent moved his rook, and now you're absolutely back in business because not you got the pawn and you got a much more active rook than your opponent. So this is a winning position. b5, good move. Okay, so this is a good spot to stop and think about what is the plan to win from, because you're up a pawn, your pieces are much more active, but what's the plan to win the game from here?
Well, I have to get my king involved somehow, and I think it probably involves pushing those like pushing the g pawn. I think g5 at a certain point was probably a better move than allowing him to lock down the position, which is what happened. Or bringing it all the way to like the a file and just going up there, which I don't know, seems kind of slow.
It is slow, but you got time. Like, so this is actually the big shift, right? Because in the middle game, slow is a problem because usually your opponent's doing something
Yeah,
that, if you give them a few moves, they're going to hit you with something. Here, your opponent is completely tied down. There's really nothing he can do. So you could almost just think about just picking up your pieces and arranging them however you want to on the board, because you can essentially do that. Your opponent can just wait.
I see. So even something like f6 here, just looking for like pawn breaks and space for my king, like would that have been a more viable option maybe?
You could do that, but
Or is that
um,
still too fast?
well, your extra pawn is here, so
Yeah.
you want to use that. Like kingside, it's like 3 versus 3, so there's nothing really going on over there. So for me, the pawn break I'm going to use to win this game is b4. But remember, improve your position to the maximum before changing it. So I'm not going to do that right away. I'm going to bring my king to
Okay.
c6, even to a5 if I want to. Then I'm going to play b4, and I'm going to push my pawn and win the game.
Okay, and I just have time for that. Because
Yeah.
I think I was somehow thinking he might be able to break through on the king side if I didn't, I don't know, if I didn't like have any pieces over there,
Mm,
but probably not.
yeah, but the thing is, it's just 3 versus 3. You have no weaknesses. Your opponent also has no pieces there. So he's not really going to be able to do much to you on the king side.
Yeah.
The only thing you do have to watch out for is bishop d. Like, I'd say bishop d1. Let's just say bishop d1. This is like probably the only realistic way for your opponent to really change the position. So you should consider this. But you can take. You can't take with the king because you take this and you're eating all these pawns. So that's going to be easy. And if he takes with the rook, now you can come in and grab this one. I guess you can get back your b pawn, but again,
But then I still have that passer. Yeah, that just looks so much better.
and you can probably just go here, collect this. Now, and a rook and pawn endgame up one pawn is not automatically winning by any means.
Yeah.
But if it's a protected pass pawn, that's a monster. So this should be winning, and I think you're also winning that d4 pawn. I don't really see how white saves that except by trading rooks. And of course, we know king and pawn endgames up one pawn are almost always winning. Certainly, if we have a protected pass pawn.
Yeah.
So this is what we call schematic thinking, meaning you don't even have to calculate. It's like just think about like, okay, how do I arrange my pieces? What do I do? And how do I ultimately win the game? You can do this when your opponent is reduced to utter passivity. So you better be sure your opponent can't do anything. But in this case, the opponent really can't do anything. So yeah, we just bring the king, we play b4, and gradually advance the pawn.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I think I had thought about that plan in the game, but I don't know. I thought it was too slow. But it's something that, like, I don't get these kind of endgames
Mhm.
very often, so it's just something I'm not super experienced into. So, I mean, just even having, you talk through these ideas of the practical endgame is, like, gonna be very helpful if I ever get this kind of situation again in the future.
And it does make sense because as you become a stronger player, the end game becomes more important.
Yeah, definitely.
Because when you're starting out, usually if the game makes it to an end game, someone is so far ahead that like not a lot of technique is required. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to be an end game genius to win if you're up like a rook and a bishop.
Right, exactly.
You just like move your stuff over there and kill them. But if
Yeah.
you're up one pawn, that's like a little bit more delicate.
Right, right, right.
Now, another feature of this though is as long as you don't change the position, you can't really if you don't change the position, you can't really mess this up. Your opponent can't do anything anyway. So G5. Now here's where I would play. I do like G5. It's not absolutely necessary, but in the end game, generally you want, if you have bishops of same color, you want your pawns not on the color, and you want to fix your opponent's pawns on the color because that's where the pawns can be captured. That's where they're weak. Magnus Carlsen probably plays this in like 0.01 seconds. Just recognizing the pattern of
Yeah, yeah.
this pawn.
Well, and even like when he played G4, like that's something I've started to see with some of these higher rated players that I face, like just that idea of like just shoving a pawn forward in the end game, like not defended by anything, and it's something that I feel like I would never really consider. And even playing G5 to counter it is also something I clearly did not consider. So again, just like getting more experience in these types of things is going to help me, I think, quite a lot.
Having said that, G5 is just a nice move to fix it on the light square. You don't really have to do that, even if you play whatever. So now your pawns are fixed on the light squares, but you can still probably just do this plan. Your opponent still can't really break through on the king side.
Yeah, so I just have to know that that is the ultimate goal, which I clearly did not have in mind or did not have the patience to do.
And you want to use the advantage you have. So in this case, your extra pawn is over here. So that's where you're going to be looking. But this was really the key. So again, trading. The first trade was okay. This one actually, after this, I don't think there's any way for you to win the game because this king is just going to come to a3, and from here I don't see a way to break through. You can't really just trade indiscriminately, and your rook is like this rook is like a beast on the second rank, just locking everything down. This rook on c1 very passive. So you're trading extremely active piece for an extremely passive piece. You're not far enough ahead to like be able to afford that and still win the game.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, like what does white even do here? It's just there's really no way to break through or there's just nothing.
And like something like this, I mean, you can take this, but even if you ignore it, like that bishop's
Yeah.
not doing anything. I guess like in theory, white could do something like h4, h5, like king around, rook comes in, but while they're doing that, you're going to be like taking all their pieces and making a queen on the queen side. So that's not really going to work for them.
Yeah, definitely have some good takeaways here as far as how to spice up my study routine a little bit. It's kind of fallen by the wayside these last couple of weeks because I've had to finish up a class and everything. So, yeah, I'm excited to get back into it with a bit more of a focus on probably end games based on this last game.
Yeah, the way I think about my training is play, review, and solve are always a constant if you want to be getting better.
Yeah.
And then you can slot in, with those being continuous, then you focus on one thing at a time to say like, okay, where's one area where I'll try to upgrade my knowledge. For you, maybe practical end games, maybe this is a good time to work on that. So like you could work through the Shereshevsky book. Another great thing to do would be I'm a huge fan of like the guess the move style of training
Oh, yeah.
where you play through the games and try to guess the moves one by one. So you could do guess the move with a player like Capablanca, who's a great
Mm.
endgame master and who has a great sense of like clarity and purpose as far as like this idea of improve the position to the maximum before changing it and just grind the opponent down. So Capablanca is like one of the big masters of playing in that way.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much, Nate. I really appreciate you hopping on. Would love to have another session sometime. I'm not sure exactly when that will be because I'm very busy this fall, but we will try and make it happen.